look, if the live screen goes down at any point, we must pause immediately. Committee staff will let you know if that happens and continue on to advise you about what to do. Upon first hearing the live stream is down, I will, or the chair should interrupt whomever is whatever is happening and I shall read the following, and I will say something at that time.
Chairman Sablan, I believe we are good to go to restart the hearing, sir.
Right. So see, there was never a fifth hearing first. So this is again an entirely remote hearing, and as such, the committee hearing room is officially closed. Members who choose to sit with their individual devices in the hearing room must wear headphones to avoid feedback, echoes, and distortion resulting from more than one person on the software platform sitting in the same room. Members are also expected to adhere to social distancing and safe healthcare guidelines, including the use of masks, hand sanitizer, and wiping down their areas both before and after their presence in the hearing room. In order to ensure that the committee's 5-minute rules adhered to, staff will be keeping track of time using the committee's field timer. The field timer will appear in its own thumbnail picture and will be named 001_timer. There will be no 1 minute remaining warning. The field timer will show a blinking light when time is up. Members and witnesses are asked to wrap up promptly when their time has expired. While a roll call is not necessary to establish a quorum in official proceedings conducted remotely or with remote participation, the committee has made it a practice whenever there's an official proceeding with remote participation for the clerk to call the roll to help make clear who is present at the start of the proceeding. Members should say their name before announcing they are present. This helps the clerk and also helps those watching the platform and the live stream who may experience a few seconds delay. At this time, I ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Chairman Sablan.
Present, Sablan present.
Mrs. Hayes.
Present.
Mr. Grijalva.
Grijalva present.
Mr. Yarmouth. Ms. Wilson.
Ms. Wilson present.
Mr. DeSaulnier. Mr. Morelli. Mrs. McBath.
Present.
Mr. Levin. Ms. Manning. Mr. Bowman.
Mr. Bowman is present.
Chairman Scott.
Chairman Scott is present.
Ranking Member Owens.
Owens present.
Mr. Grossman. Mr. Grossman, I believe you're on mute.
Sorry, present.
Thank you. Mr. Allen.
Allen's present.
Mr. Keller.
Keller is present.
Mrs. Miller.
Miller present.
Mr. Cawthorn. Mrs. Steele.
Steele present.
Ms. Letlow.
Letlow present.
Ranking Member Fox. Chairman Sablan, that concludes the roll call. Chairman Sablan,
Mr. Chairman, you're on mute, sir.
Thank you. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8C, opening statements are limited to the chair and the ranking member. This allows us to hear from our witnesses sooner and provides all members with adequate time to ask questions. I now recognize myself for the purpose of making an opening statement. Today's hearing is focused on our responsibility to support the education of children who are homeless or in foster care. Children without stable homes start at a disadvantage that can follow them for the rest of their lives, denying them the opportunity to achieve their full potential as human beings and members of society. That is a tragedy for them and a loss for us all. This is not an insignificant problem. Prior to the pandemic, the Department of Health and Human Services estimated that 430,000 children were in foster care. More than 1.3 million school children lacked a stable and adequate place to sleep during the 2018-2019 school year, according to the United States Department of Education. More than 1.4 million children under the age of 6 experienced homelessness. Recent research in Michigan suggests almost 1 in 10 public school students will be homeless at some point before graduation from high school. 1 in 10. And of course, youth homelessness reflects other persistent inequities in education and across our society. Black children, Native American children, students with disabilities, English language learners, and LGBTQ children are all more likely to experience homelessness and foster care than their peers. And the outcomes are clear. In 2018, the graduation rate for homeless students was 68% nationwide, 86% for those with stable homes. And the pandemic has only made the problem worse. We all know how hard it has been for our constituents to keep their children on track with their education during the pandemic. Even children with stable homes have faced difficulty. For children who are homeless or in foster care, moving from place to place, these difficulties have been even more severe. Research indicates from 1 to 3 million children have not attended school since the pandemic began, and principal among them are students experiencing homelessness or in foster care. This does not simply mean lost classroom time. The pandemic has jeopardized access to clothing, to adequate nutritious food, to healthcare, and other critical aid schools provide. The consequences of this gap in the care of homeless children will be felt by all of us long after the pandemic is behind us. And this is not to say Congress has been idle. The American Rescue Plan, which we passed in March, provides a combined $2 billion to strengthen Head Start programs, which holistically help young children deal with the many challenges of experiencing homelessness and foster care. This funding is designed not only to cover the increased cost of providing education during the pandemic, but also, where possible, to help children catch up on lost instruction time. Our American Rescue Plan includes $52.5 billion for the Child Care and Development Block Grant with new flexibilities so families experiencing homelessness can access child care. The American Rescue Plan brought $130 billion to communities nationwide for K-12 education and includes $800 million specifically to help homeless children and secure the staff and resources for homeless need to remain connected to school. What challenges are school districts facing in identifying and serving students experiencing homelessness and children in foster care? How are school districts using COVID relief funds to ensure these unique populations of students are connected with the services they need to be successful? What more can we do? What more should we do? Our witnesses today will help answer those questions and provide feedback on how the investment we made in the American Rescue Plan and other relief legislation are helping vulnerable students make it through the COVID-19 pandemic, and how those investments will help protect these children in the future from the trauma of experiencing homelessness and in the foster care system. I would now turn to the ranking member, Mr. Owens, for the purpose of making an opening statement. Mr. Owens, you're recognized. Yeah, okay.
Okay, how's that?
There you are, sir.
Okay, one second, hold tight.
No problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Over a year, students across our country have been negatively impacted by school closures. This has been an even greater impact on the foster, homeless, and housing insecure youth. For these children, school is so much more than a place to learn. It's a place that provides provide meals, structure, and safety they don't necessarily receive anywhere else. The most frustrating part of this situation is that the research demonstrates, and has demonstrated for months, that school-age children are less likely to transmit the virus to others, including adults. Further reducing this risk, nearly 80% of teachers have received at least one dose of the vaccine by the beginning of April. There's absolutely no reason for our schools to remain closed, and yet half of the school districts across this country are still not receiving full-time in-person instructions. To the children who have gone hungry, whose abuse have gone unnoticed, or have had no recourse from the streets, I would like to explain what has kept our schools closed for so long, and it's not the science. The Biden administration has relied too much on the desire of teachers' unions, causing unnecessary, prolonged closures that continue to inflict real harm on children lacking a home or stable family life. We finally heard last week from the president of American Federation of Teachers, the same union that lobbied the CDC to keep our schools closed, that schools should reopen in-person learning 5 days a week in the fall. I'm ecstatic that we're finally in agreement on this issue, but that's not good enough. Schools should have reopened full-time months ago. This wasted time has caused irreparable damage to millions of children and students nationwide. In fact, we'll hear from one foster parent about how these closures left her children without the attention and instruction they needed to be successful in the classroom, and how countless other children facing abuse and neglect were denied the lifeline offered by in-person instructions. My Democratic colleagues love to argue that throwing more money at this problem is a solution. We will spend this hearing today highlighting President Biden's America Rescue Plan relief scheme, in which 20% of the funding of the elementary and secondary school emergency relief fund must go toward addressing learning loss. They'll talk about money for homeless education. This is the third hearing on the impact of the pandemic, and each time they've highlighted their desire for more money instead of our children's need to get back to classroom. The fact is, no more money, no amount of money will fix the harm that's been done and continues to be done to these children and their families. What our children need is to get back to school in person, full time. None of these so-called relief funding will go toward the reopening of schools this spring. What are the children who are homeless, housing insecure, or in foster care supposed to do until then? Democrats have no answer. Sadly, my friends across the aisle are willing to ignore the needs of vulnerable children, pretending that the dollar signs in hearings are a significant response for our youth who are falling further and further behind. They do not know where the next meal will come from, and they're desperate for structure and normality during a once-in-a-century pandemic. House Republicans will not stop fighting to reopen schools across this country until every one of them has unlocked their doors. We know this is the best way to help our nation's children. Thank you, and I yield back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Owens, Ranking Member Owens. Now, without objection, all other members who wish to insert written statements into the record may do so by submitting them to the committee clerk electronically in Microsoft Word format by 5 p.m. on June the 2nd, 2021. I will now introduce our witnesses. Ms. Jennifer Erb Downward is a senior research associate at Poverty Solutions at the University of Michigan, where she oversees research projects and assists with the analysis and translation of research findings regarding family homelessness to inform local, state, and federal policy. Ms. Erb Downward has extensive experience in policy analysis, program implementation, and best practice research around family homelessness, behavioral health, chronic illness, and the reduction of health disparities. She is passionate about addressing child homelessness in Michigan, where she grew up. If I'm misstating your name, please forgive me. Ms. Erb Downward holds a master's degree in public health from New York University. Mrs. Michelle Linder-Colts serves as an executive director for the School District of Philadelphia's Office of Early Childhood and is responsible for the implementation and oversight of federal, state, and locally funded pre-kindergarten and Head Start programs serving 8,000 children in more than 100 community-based early learning centers in Philadelphia. She is also a member of the Pennsylvania Early Learning Council, which works to expand and improve early learning and development services for young children and their families across the state. Ms. Linder-Colts has been an educator for more than 25 years and was a Head Start parent and student herself. She holds a master's degree in education administration and serves on a number of advisory committees that are instrumental in shaping and elevating the importance of early childhood education in Pennsylvania. Ms. Gretchen Davis is a mother to 3 children, 2 of whom are biological and 1 adopted through foster care. As a foster family in Arlington County for over 8 years, Ms. Davis often speaks in community forums for the Arlington County Department of Human Services, encouraging others to consider fostering. Prior to fostering, Ms. Davis served as an elementary and middle school teacher for 15 years in both Tennessee and Washington, or as an assistant to the Deputy Undersecretary of Education during the Bush administration. In light of COVID-related school closures, Ms. Davis began her involvement in Arlington Parents for Education, a local group advocating for the immediate return to an in-person education for all students. Ms. Davis holds an undergraduate degree and a master's in education from Vanderbilt University. Dr. James F. Lane, Doctor of Education, serves as an executive officer of the Virginia Department of Education, which is the administrative agency for the Commonwealth's public schools. In this role, he oversees 132 divisions for the Commonwealth's public school, and also serves as the Secretary of the State Board of Education. Dr. Lane holds a doctorate in education from the University of Virginia, a master's degree in social administration from North Carolina State University, and a master's and bachelor's degree in teaching from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We appreciate the witnesses for participating today and look forward to your testimony. Let me remind the witnesses that we have read your written statements and they will appear in full in the hearing record. Pursuant to Committee Rule 8D and committee practice, each of you is asked to limit your oral presentation to a 5-minute summary of your written statements. Before you begin your testimony, please remember to unmute your microphone. During your testimony, staff will be keeping track of time and a light will blink when time is up. Please be attentive to the time, wrap up when your time is over, and remute your microphone. If any of you experience technical difficulties during your testimony or later in the hearing, you should stay connected on the platform, make sure you are muted, and use your phone to immediately call the committee's IT director, whose number was provided to you in advance. We will let all the witnesses make their presentations before we move to member questions. When answering a question, please remember to unmute your microphone. The witnesses are aware of their responsibility to provide accurate information to the subcommittee, and therefore we will proceed with their testimony. And I will first recognize, I hope I'm getting your name right, Ms. Earp Downward.
You're getting my name perfectly right, thank you.
Okay.
Chairman Sablan, Ranking Member Owens, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify at this important hearing. I come before you today to share my research and what we know about the educational implications of homelessness, housing instability, and foster care among children in the United States. Data from my work in Michigan, New York City, and nationally corroborates a growing body of evidence that shows housing instability to have negative educational, developmental, and health consequences for children. I'm also here today to share with you information on the impact the pandemic has had on homeless children and youth, and to talk about opportunities that funding through the American Rescue Plan brings to address these challenges. Before I begin, I want to be clear, though, that when I talk about homelessness, I am referring to children who are homeless as defined by federal education law under the McKinney-Vento Act. Pre-pandemic, roughly 1 in 16 children under the age of 6 years were estimated to be homeless. An additional 1.4 million homeless children were identified in K-12 schools. The vast majority, 77% of these children, were staying doubled up in another person's house and therefore were not eligible for HUD housing or shelter supports. Among children in foster care, roughly 440,000 were in placements at the most recent point in time count. These numbers are of concern to this committee because homeless children face significantly worse educational outcomes than their peers, and these challenges persist even after stable housing is found. My analysis of both Michigan and New York City educational data shows this to be true across educational indicators. 3rd through 8th grade students who were formerly homeless had almost the same grade level proficiency rates in English and math as their currently homeless peers. And like their peers who experienced homelessness during high school, 1/4 of students who experienced homelessness in middle school dropped out. While housing is critical, housing alone does not close the educational gap faced by students who've experienced homelessness. No national estimate for the number of children who experienced homelessness at any point during their K-12 education exists. But for perspective, in Michigan, 1 in every 10 students will experience homelessness by the time they graduate or leave high school. This is roughly 5 times the annual rate. The risk is even greater for Black and Hispanic students, with roughly 1 in 7 experiencing homelessness at some point during their K-12 education. While children in foster care face different structural challenges than their homeless peers, entering foster care is a form of instability, and children in foster care face educational setbacks similar to those of their homeless peers. Further, a strong intersection exists between homelessness and the risk of entering foster care. Children who were homeless the prior year had 14 times the risk of entering foster care compared to their peers who were not homeless during the same year. I want to be clear that we're not just talking about numbers today. We're talking about children. Brittany is a student from Michigan who was homeless when she was 10 years old. She was a straight A student, somehow managing her schoolwork while living in her family's car with her mother. Like so many other children who are unstably housed, just getting to school was a challenge. She was frequently late and missed more days than school attendance policy allowed. As a result, she was suspended for 150 days. At that time, there was no one to advocate for her, no one to help connect her to the school transportation supports she had a right to under McKinney-Vento law, and no one to work with her school to remove the suspension. This did not have to be the case for Brittany. She was not identified by her school as homeless, and therefore she did not receive the educational supports that she needed. The COVID pandemic has increased the number of homeless children facing challenges like those described by Brittany. Survey responses from school homelessness liaisons suggest that there has been a 28% decrease in the number of homeless students identified by schools prior to the pandemic. This equates to 420,000 fewer students who are homeless being identified and supported by their schools. The good news is that the American Rescue Plan recognized this problem and has provided $800 million in targeted funds to meet the educational needs of homeless children. The pandemic has caused hundreds of thousands of children who are homeless to slip through the cracks. we now have the opportunity to find and support those children. Among the many other things, these dollars can be used to support transportation solutions to help homeless children get to school, to provide service and housing navigators, to support early education and college transitions, and to increase homeless liaison capacity, particularly in the 75% of local education agencies that currently do not hold the McKinney-Vento subgrant. Thank you again for giving me the time to speak at this hearing, and I look forward to your questions.
Well, thank you, Ms. Earp Downward. I'm in perfect timing, I must say. And thank you. We will now hear from Mrs. Linda Coates. Ms. Coates, please unmute your microphone and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Greetings, Chair Sablon, Ranking Members Owens, and other honorable members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity for me to testify at the hearing today. My name is Michelle Linda Coates, and I am the Executive Director of Pre-K Partnerships for the School District of Philadelphia, which provides Head Start programming to over 6,500 3- and 4-year-olds across the city of Philadelphia. As you know, many of our students and their caregivers face great adversity. Our office works to combat this adversity and impact of poverty through a comprehensive support model that addresses the various conditions students and families face outside of the security of the Head Start classroom, particularly families experiencing housing challenges and children who receive foster care. I am honored to speak with you today about the work we have done these past 14 months to support Philadelphia's families in need. In our program, Servicing Families Protected under the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Act starts with identification and recruitment. Our recruitment and identification efforts have been successful through the establishment of strong partnerships with many of Philadelphia's social services agencies, including forming relationships directly with city shelters. Monthly, we participate in early childhood workshops that focus on focusing relationships and fostering relationships with city shelter staff and early childhood staff together, which enhances our collective ability to service our families. We also attend and host pre-K enrollment fairs at shelters, which also allows our staff to inform parents about Head Start and inform them of all of the services that we offer, and also at the same time enroll their children. Through this close relationship with shelter staff, we've also been able to co-complete a self-assessment tool to improve services. We like to hear from our families how we're doing and how we can better service them. Based on the results of the assessments, we've changed our Head Start application, all of our marketing material, to be more inclusive and eliminating the word homeless, as most McKinney-Vento eligible families do not identify as such. We know that utilizing more common phrases used by families such as temporarily living in housing with relatives or friends, or new to the country and looking for housing is a softer indicator that families may be McKinney-Vento eligible, and it sits better with our families. Once identified, families are given top priority as we support families through an expedited transition process to school and addressing immediate needs such as clothing, during school supplies, temporary transportation, and those things that families identify as their immediate needs. During the pandemic, many families did not feel safe participating in participating in face-to-face options that the district offered, and we were unable to participate in many cases in helping families understand why it's important for their children to attend school. So we partnered with our Department of Health and we offered some town hall meetings to help educate families, specifically our families who were experiencing homelessness and who were in foster care, understand why it's important to come back to school, return to school, and understand all of the safety protocols that we've put in place in order to support them in face-to-face learning. To support our virtual learning, because many of our families chose to do digital learning, we ensured that we kept students connected by purchasing necessary technology and digital curriculums for the teachers, consumables and non-consumable learning materials for families to use at home, also using funds to train teachers on the use of technology and helping them understand how to best support our youngest learners and our most vulnerable learners in the virtual environment. For our foster families specifically, we expedite services and also make sure that our social services team establish working relationships with and provide contact information for the family assigned case manager. Our social services team work with the case managers to make sure that they're making progress towards the set goals established by the foster agencies. We also partner with community agencies to provide resources to our children in foster care and families experiencing homelessness with healthcare, food, clothing, and the like. We saw the impact of the pandemic as families in our program, the homeless families were decreased. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
I know that was my timer as well. Thank you. I was concluding and wrapping up with the idea that we are working diligently each day to make a positive impact to ensure our neediest families have the opportunity for lifelong success.
Thank you, Ms. Dendercoat. I'm also that was first time I've ever heard that too, but thank you for your testimony. And next, we will hear from Ms. Davis. Ms. Davis, please unmute your microphone and you have 5 minutes.
Good afternoon, Chairman Sablin, Ranking Member Owens, and members of the Early Childhood Elementary Secondary Education Committee, Subcommittee, Early Childhood. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today as you address the impact of COVID-19 on students experiencing homelessness and children in foster care. My husband and I have been foster parents for over 8 years in Arlington, Virginia. We have adopted one child through foster care who is now 7. We have had 22 other children ranging in age from 4 days to 14 years in our home. Being a foster family has been the most rewarding and also the most difficult endeavor we have undertaken. In March 2020, a week after quarantine began, 2 girls ages 4 and 5 joined our family. We welcomed these scared and sad little ones into our home, and over the following days began to figure out school for 5 kids, our own 3 and 2 foster children. We set up a makeshift classroom and began using activities and iPad programs provided by the schools. The girls adjusted well in our home, but as often happens with kids who have experienced trauma, we saw they were very behind in school. Addressing the girls' educational needs was a top priority for me, and as I emailed with their teachers, it was clear the schools were unable to provide the same supports these girls would have received if they were in person. Instead, they were provided a few daily activities totaling 30 minutes and a Microsoft Teams call twice a week. From March to June, the girls made some progress, but not without a lot of supplemental tutoring from me. I remember last spring, what would keep me awake at night was not actually my own children's struggles during the pandemic, but the damage being done to vulnerable children, students who were homeless, in foster care, English language learners, families in crisis whose children would not or could not log on or interact with school through a device. Basic academic goals of reading, writing, and problem solving for many came to a standstill. I had the resources and time to support the kids in my care, but what about those who did not? The girls returned home in November. Life is not easy, but their mother is resilient and has made great strides to keep her kids safe. The girls are in hybrid education and they go to school 2 days a week from 9 to 2:20. Their mother, who needs a job to keep her subsidized housing, has had a difficult time finding work with this abbreviated school schedule and no extended daycare provided. Currently, I help her by picking the girls up from school so she can work a full day. I'm glad to help her, but once again, I lay awake at night thinking about those families who do not have that community support. Another devastating effect of COVID-19 is the absence of mandatory reporting. As a foster parent, I'm a mandatory reporter. When I notice child abuse or neglect, I'm required by law to report it so that the concern can be investigated. Mandatory reporters are a critical safety net we have in the United States for vulnerable children. Teachers, school administrators, and staff are also mandatory reporters. When students are stuck at home and not allowed to be out in society, mandatory reporting cannot happen. How can a teacher see bruises on a student over a Microsoft Teams call? How comfortable will a student feel confiding in a trusted adult about sexual abuse over a Zoom call? As a foster parent and former teacher, it concerns me that one of the consequences of staying shut down for so long is underreported child abuse and neglect. I would suggest to you, as we look back on how we handle COVID-19 and how we handled it as a nation, that best practices going forward ensure that just as grocery stores and hospitals need to be open, schools also offer critical lifelines for communities. All are staffed by essential employees. Just like hospitals care for sick people, schools care for children, who are among the most vulnerable populations we have. Teachers have always been on the front lines for children. I was a teacher for 15 years and never questioned that for a minute. Why now all of a sudden are many teachers hidden away and not able to do what they do best, which is to care for and educate children? Many public school systems have yanked stability and support from children and handed them iPads and free Wi-Fi. In my experience as a teacher, a mother, and a foster mother, I am convinced that a good education is a lifeline for all children. Schools have been closed way too long. What began as an important step to flatten the curve and protect people from an unknown virus became over a year of excuses and panic to make everything just right and 100% safe before reopening. Vulnerable children do not have the luxury of this time. Many local educational agencies, including my own, have not prioritized return to school for vulnerable children. The services they have provided during the past year have been insufficient. Our children deserve much better. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Davis, for your testimony. And finally, we'll hear from Dr. Lane. Dr. Lane, please unmute your microphone and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. Chairman Sablon, Ranking Member Owens, and members of the House Education Labor Subcommittee, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to be here this morning to share how this pandemic has uniquely impacted our youth in foster care and students experiencing homelessness, and how we have responded. One of the most marked insights to come from the COVID-19 pandemic is just how critical a role our schools play in every aspect of our students' and families' lives. Schools are more than the educational experiences they provide, but they also serve as safe havens, reliable sources of food, connection, and stability. Over the last year, our students without stable housing, reliable access to devices or broadband, or difficult home environments felt the effects of the pandemic most profoundly due to interruptions in their connection to these vital services and supports. For multiple reasons, Virginia has worked hard to encourage or offer safe in-person learning to our students. Schools have risen to the challenge and consistently continue to expand in-person learning opportunities while prioritizing the needs of students most disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. This has been made possible only with the financial support from the federal government to help schools cover all costs from all manner of health and safety, including educational technology and student support services. So I want to recognize the heroic efforts of teachers, support staff, school counselors, nurses, principals, and administrators, and thank them all for their commitment and dedication to students. The pandemic has also strained the systems that support these students in unprecedented ways, and the strain on the system has been twofold. First, we have seen increased demand for services. Families in Virginia have suffered from the economic repercussions of the pandemic. The same economic disruption, stress, trauma, and logistical considerations of the pandemic have disrupted existing foster families and created conditions that will likely increase the number of youth in need of foster placements. These factors are interrelated, and the compounding effect has been spikes in both rates of student homelessness and housing instability, and unique strains on the foster care system. The second major strain on the system has been related to limitations on quickly identifying and serving families. Remote learning virtual family visitations, fewer home visits have disguised some of the telltale signs that students are struggling. But Virginia has a solid foundation upon which to build because of the previous state and federal investment in the systems that support homeless and foster youth, including our highly regarded work with Project Hope, Virginia's program for the education of homeless children and youth. However, even before the pandemic, resources were insufficient to meet the demand of families in need. So we've worked collaboratively to strategically leverage new federal resources to scale existing programs and meet the needs in new ways. Our department sought to bring many partners into the conversation around supporting homeless students. This has included bi-weekly calls with local McKinney-Vento liaisons so they could receive updates, ask questions, and share challenges and success stories. That collaboration has informed new technical assistance, including videos for liaisons, social emotional learning quick guides, and new grants to scale work to meet the need. This collaboration is focused on sharing best practices and planning for the strategic deployment of the remaining America Rescue Plan, homeless children and youth funds when they are made available to states. Additionally, the joint agency team has continued to meet through the pandemic and provide guidance, policies to foster family connections, and communication across agencies and jurisdictions. Virginia and our localities have funded mechanisms such as virtual visitations, reimbursement for COVID-related testing or treatment, and virtual training and support for foster families. Even though we all want in-person learning, the virtual communications environment has its unique benefits for some foster youth. For instance, one student in foster care was able to visit a relative in another state for a week due to virtual learning, helping support family connections that are crucial to the well-being of children in foster care. The local department that shared this story also stated that they have felt an even stronger relationship with and more support with their local school divisions around children and youth in foster care during the pandemic. They specifically said they have seen a shift from "that's not possible" responses to "how do we make this work" perspectives in their conversations. In conclusion, the response of our agency and local school divisions to COVID-19 has been made possible through additional federal funding intended for pandemic relief. As we begin to emerge from the pandemic, we know that the impacts will ripple through communities for years to come. As such, sustained and flexible resources will continue to be necessary to ensure that states can be responsive and can provide the services necessary for these students to succeed. On behalf of Virginia students and school leaders, thank you for the significant investments that have been made in our schools and our students.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Lane. I mean, all the witnesses are just almost perfect in their timing. I just like to say that if only we could figure out a way to just eliminate homelessness and foster care for school children, and if possible, even just remove poverty from the nation. Now we'll go to member questions. I will ask staff to bring back the bell if necessary, but under Committee Rule 9A, we will now question witnesses under the 5-minute rule. I will be recognizing subcommittee members in seniority order. Again, to ensure that the members' 5-minute rules adhere to, staff will be keeping track of time, and the timer will show a blinking light when the time has expired, and maybe bring back the bell if necessary. So please be attentive to the time, wrap up when your time is over, and remute your microphone. Now I would like to begin recognizing members questioning by recognizing the a teacher, National Teacher of the Year, Miss Congresswoman Hayes. Joanna, you please unmute your microphone and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Sablan, and thank you for having this hearing. And thank you to all the witnesses. I have remarks prepared, but I just want to start by saying it is incredibly exhausting on this committee when hearing after hearing, we're having conversations as if we don't all recognize the importance of getting kids back to school. I think both Democrats and Republicans share that. We've tried to do that safely. We're handling a once-in-a-generation pandemic that none of us asked for, that none of us can account for, and we've all just tried to do the best that we can to protect students, families, teachers, and to hear, I say this in every hearing, to hear over and over teachers' unions berated. I remind you of the irony in the fact that those unions are made up of teachers, the same people that you're saying your children need to go back to. because they are the lifeblood and they are the ones who invest in them and nurture them, and they are the ones who are the mandated reporters. Those same teachers are listening to these hearings and being demoralized over and over and over again as if they're lazy and too demanding and only thinking of themselves. And I can assure you, having been in the classroom for 15 years, there's no teacher that wakes up and does that job every day that doesn't first think about their students and children. So it's just worth saying that we want kids to go back to school. We want every school to open. We want kids to grow and thrive and learn in those environments. But enough of this. Democrats don't want kids to go to school. That is just not true. And it is the reason why we voted overwhelmingly for funding and support and resources to assist with those openings. So my question for you, Ms. Herb Downward, we've heard about all of these students, and I worked very closely with McKinney-Vento in my school district, and we were a Title I district with so many children who lived in poverty. My Connecticut State Department of Children and Families reports that most of the families that are struggling with homelessness also report poverty conditions, being disconnected from services, and these underlying things that are not abuse. So at a time when poverty could be the underlying factor and not abuse, especially coming out of this pandemic, we're going to see so many families who are dealing with just different ripple effect issues. How can we be sure that those families are not subjected to unnecessary investigations and rather are helped by safety net programs that can help them to stabilize their families and get out of poverty, even though it may present as, you know, what someone else might call neglect or abuse?
Thank you so much for this question. I think it's a really, really great one, and it comes up frequently among both community organizations and among families. There is a great fear among families that if they acknowledge their homelessness, that they will be at risk of losing their children. I think the statistic that I shared that, you know, there is a 14 times greater risk of children who are homeless entering into foster care in the next year than their peers who are housed is really telling of, you know, that challenge. One critical piece there. So the first thing is, I think that we need to understand that more, and we need to acknowledge that intersection. And I think we need to have more frank conversations about the fact that homelessness and poverty alone are not reasons that a child should be removed from their family. That is in the guidelines and the mandatory reporting guidelines. You know, I recognize that as a mandated reporter, this can be a very challenging thing to, in and of itself, by itself, is not abuse. So how many children could we potentially be preventing from removal if we were actually just addressing the underlying instability there? I think right now with the American Rescue Plan, there are some resources that exist that can be used to help families. And one of the great things about the $800 million that's been allocated to serve homeless families is we have an opportunity to reach those families and bridge some of those gaps. So for example, 77% of families are not eligible for HUD or shelter supports because they're living or staying doubled up temporarily with another family. You know, this really cuts people out of services, but we have the opportunity, because these dollars are flexible in their funding, that we can bridge those gaps. So for example, a homelessness liaison could use dollars to temporarily put a family up in a hotel. Now, this is not supposed to be the money supplanting other dollars for hotel stays or shelter, but if you take that money and help that family into a hotel for a few days, they can be eligible for HUD housing supports. That's giving them access to a funding stream that exists.
I'm sorry, my time has expired, but I so appreciate your comments, because that is the exact intent of the legislation that we passed in the American Rescue Plan, to hit those core poverty issues and lift our children out of those situations. Mr. Chair, I'll submit the rest of my questions. And with that, I yield back. I'm sorry for going over.
Okay, yeah. I understand the ranking member of the full committee, Dr. Fox. Dr. Fox, please unmute, and you have 5 minutes.
Uh, Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it, and I appreciate our witnesses being here today. My questions are for Ms. Davis. Ms. Davis, thank you for your testimony, and thank you for your family's willingness to participate in the foster system and love these children. I truly hope there's a place in heaven for you all. I like when witnesses bring recommendations to our hearings, and you're the second parent to testify before the subcommittee about the essential nature of schools. Many of us agree the initial closures last spring were reasonable, given what was unknown about the coronavirus at the time. But you argue for treating schools like hospitals and grocery stores that never closed. Could you explain that in more detail?
Ms. Davis, I think your microphone.
I'm sorry. Thank you for that question. I just quite simply believe that schools are just as critical as hospitals. Learning is so critical for students and in person. It's important to have FaceTime, and I'm not talking about the app. I'm talking about FaceTime with teachers. It's important for schools to provide, as we've said over and over again, the many other supports to families. My precious family that we are still very close with, even though the children are not in our home anymore, they struggle daily because school is not open. And mom is struggling to figure out how to work on abbreviated hours and figure out how to manage when the supports that she relies on, dropping her child off at 8 a.m. and picking them up at 5 after daycare, has just been stripped away. And what baffles me is the disconnect in knowing what we need to do and seeing districts around the country that have done it, that have gone back in October and figured it out, put on their masks, figured out social distance guidelines, and went to work. They figured out how to do it, yet there are so many communities like my own, in my own school district, Arlington Public Schools, that are just stuck and paralyzed. And it just baffles me, and it has frustrated parents in the communities when we see the solution. It's not rocket science. Teachers want to do the best job they can, and they know that it's in person. I have to be honest, the teachers have made lemonade out of lemons in this situation, but they're not able to do what they need to do because they're not in person.
I agree with you. I think most teachers want to be there, and they have good hearts. They want to do it. And God bless you for continuing to work with the mother of the foster children. We've been critical of teachers' unions that have resisted efforts to reopen schools. Again, there's a difference between the teachers' unions and the teachers themselves. In response, we've been assured their resistance is really based on a desire to protect the health and safety of children. But it sounds like you believe the opposite's true, that keeping schools closed has been harmful to kids. Do you believe long-term children? I think your answer to that is no, correct?
Correct.
Thank you. You also discuss in your testimony the role of teachers and other school personnel as mandatory reporters when abuse is suspected. You also talk about the problem of underreporting of abuse during the pandemic because of virtual learning. From your experience as a foster parent and a teacher, why is in-person interaction so important in identifying potential abuse? And what do you think will be the long-term implication of the reduced reporting?
Quite simply, you can't report what you don't see. And I know that teachers, I have heard lots of amazing stories of teachers who have caught abuse online and sent school officers over, and CPS got involved and those families were helped. But that is only what they see at that moment in time. And the amazing thing about teachers is that they are very intuitive, and they rely on FaceTime with students, watching students carefully, interacting with students personally to pick up on subtle issues and problems. Pediatricians have said there's going to be a huge mental health crisis. We've seen reports by even the CDC, it's better for them to be in school. I mean, it's just, it makes sense. And I do worry about raising a generation of children who have been scarred for 15 months by this pandemic, when really things could have been back to normal back in October.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Dr. Fox. I now recognize Mr. Yarmouth. Mr. Yarmouth, please unmute. You have 5 minutes. Sure.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thanks also to all of the witnesses. This is a topic that I have a great personal interest in. My district is the founding place of National Safe Place. I was the author and principal sponsor of the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act. So I've got a lot of background in the challenges that we face. And I also just want to mention, because it's related but not directly on point, that my district has one of the largest school systems in the country, 100,000 kids. And you know, like in most urban school districts, we have over the course of a year, 50% of our students change school one or more times. And it's been an amazing experience talking to the teachers who are being held accountable year after year for teaching moving targets. And this is something, again, related, because I think that there is some point, the lessons we've learned through this pandemic, the ability to use technology might have some relevance to this question of mobility in the school systems as well. And I was going to ask the question that actually Ms. Herb Downard addressed, the significance of the $800 million to expense through the American Rescue Plan in dealing with these issues. And I wanted to ask Mr. Lane about that, if he can elaborate on Ms. Herb Downard's answer, and also talk about the potential for technology to deal with some of these other issues, including mobility. Because most of those students who are mobile are essentially homeless. They're living with an aunt, they're living with a grandmother, they're shuffled off to different people, and that's where they end up just disconnected from many of the schools.
Thank you, Representative Yarmouth. The $800 million is absolutely essential to supporting our needs to recover from the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, Virginia struggled to secure sufficient funding to meet all of the requests from school divisions, especially when McKinney-Vento funds were awarded on a competitive basis. So in order to address the significant new needs, as you said, the American Rescue Plan provided near $800 million. In Virginia, this means our award will go from $1.7 million a year and increase by an additional $13 million. This will allow us to scale up programs, support more programs in localities through grants, reach many more families and communities in the Commonwealth, and continue to create endeavors for improving outreach. The funding from the ARP will not only allow us to mend the gap and provide services to programs and initiatives that have been under-resourced, but it is also an opportunity for us to shift our thinking from being reactive to proactive, because our funding at the level it was at really required a reactive approach. And so addressing that now alongside planning for ongoing implications. And of course, as it relates to technology, many of our localities, many of our school divisions have taken that funding that we've been able to provide in grants and in other ways, and have incredibly expanded technology opportunities. So technology has allowed us to identify students as homeless or youth in foster care to receive educational services and supports from their home school. And technology allowed us also to continue the education for students when we could not. This population of students can experience heightened levels of transiency. So technology has been an aid in ensuring stability for students. They move from place to place so that they can continue their education and stay put in their home school.
Great, thank you for that response. And just wanted to add, you know, there's so much, unfortunately, been so much politicization of this issue about schools staying open or not open. I know in my state of Kentucky, the governor's been taking flack from a lot of people basically on the other side of the partisan aisle about keeping schools closed. but schools have actually been open in many parts of our state for the last, since last fall. I was talking to a school superintendent in Eastern Kentucky, and they've been open since last September or October. The problem is that half the kids, the families refused to send their kids to school, even though they were open and available in the classroom. So this is not as cut and dried an issue as it may seem as to whether we open or close schools. There are a lot of elements involved there, but my time's expired and I yield back, and thank you for your response.
All right, and thank you very much, Mr. Yarmouth. And now would like to recognize the ranking member of the subcommittee, Mr. Owens. Sir, you have 5 minutes. I think you need to unmute your microphone.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chair, and all those who are testifying. I'd just like to say before I start my questioning, and there's a difference in the teachers who love their profession, love the teaching, and those are leading these unions that obviously have a different agenda. My dad taught professor for 40 years. My mom was a junior high teacher. I understand what it is to be in a home which education is paramount and is loved by those who are teaching. So kudos to those teachers out there trying to do their best. But at the end of the day, we have the data now, my friends. There's a difference in the way the blue states and red states have approached this. And many people in the blue states are leaving because they want their kids to go to school and have a normal life and not be traumatized by this process. And till today, we still have, with all the data, we still have people who could not, they have districts who will not have give the options for these children to go back to school. So I just want to make that point. Ms. Davis, you talk in your testimony about the academic struggles of foster children you're caring for during the pandemic. A parent colleague of yours testified before the subcommittee a couple weeks ago, and one of his frustrations was a lack of planning within the school system to address the learning loss that has occurred. And then according to press reports just last week, Arlington County Public Schools sent a letter to parents saying that too few teachers are willing to teach summer schools. This leaves many elementary students not able to participate and to catch up. How frustrating is it for parents, and what do you think will be the long-term consequences to our children?
Thank you. That is a great question. I was shocked when I heard that my public school system was only going to offer summer school to 38% of the children eligible and was going to send the rest of them to virtual Virginia. I know for my foster daughter who will be in need of serious summer school services, I pray she's one of those 38%, because if she's not, I went through summer school with her last year and it was a disaster online. Young elementary school students do not learn well sitting in front of a screen. Elementary, as many of you know, teaching is you're moving, you're going to centers, you're around the classroom, you're trying things, you're hands-on, you're doing all kinds of things to learn to read, write, and problem solve that are kinesthetic and tactile, and to sit in a screen and to go to chat rooms and to be on computer programs just doesn't work. And I'm worried about the achievement gap, the widening of the achievement gap in our country as a result of not choosing to be in person and not letting teachers do what they know they need to do to educate, especially elementary kids. I had 3 children in my home who were learning to read on a screen. And it actually has prompted me to go back to school to learn to teach reading, because I was shocked at how ineffective the online education was. And these teachers were trying their hardest, but they know, and I know, that they need to be in school. I worry about kids not being able to catch up, sir. I worry about the dropout rate, kids getting so frustrated, and when they can drop out, they're gone. I worry about kids not being on grade level. And, you know, if my school district is any indication, and they're only able to educate 30% to play catch up in the summer, that's a real problem.
Thank you. And I just want to say that we are talking about foster children, homeless children, and housing insecure children. When I talk with the kids that you and I, all of us on this conference, not your children, not your grandchildren, these are kids who are already starting off behind and they're not allowed to go to school. This is a travesty, my friends, and there's a difference. The data will show And we'll look back on this year and see that there was a difference the way we approached this, and there's no excuse for us to put these kids at risk and have them go through the trauma they will be dealing with over this coming year. So just want to make that point, and thank you so much, Ms. Davis, truly for your efforts and everyone else here in this who's really trying to make this thing work. And I yield back.
All right, thank you, Ranking Member Owens. Let me now recognize Mr. Desaunier. Sir, unmute and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Really want to thank you and the ranking member for having this hearing, and our chairman and ranking member of the full committee. And I want to thank all our panelists as well. Ms. Erbdown, I spent a lot of time when I was in local government as a county supervisor in the Bay Area on these issues and the continuum of care for at-risk kids. A lot of those strategies that we did in partnership with this committee, actually, my predecessor, who was the former chair of this committee, we work with crisis is what we were talking about today for these kids, but then continuum of care is family planning, prenatal care, reduction in teen pregnancies. In California, we're very proud of the fact that we were able to do that significantly. The whole country has. But the dysfunctionality of the system was always painful. So we talk about stress and trauma. Federal statistics, Ms. Erbdown, what I want to ask you is, shows that most kids are actually in the system for not a long period of time, that like 50% of the time. But we know the struggle of having a CPS worker go out to a house where in urban areas in California, the retention rate for CPS workers is 50%. A young person goes in, gets a master's degree, knows what they're getting into, and still leaves. And we can't, retention's a problem. So getting the system to work and the stress on those kids in the system, again, is a continuum of care issue. So I wondered if you could give us, the committee, what you've experienced in your research about fixing the system, but these short-term situations where kids are put in and out of the foster care system. And then second to that, family reunification, which we all want, isn't successful oftentimes. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the research in that and best practices to avoid that.
Sure, that's a great question. One thing that I would like to start off with, though, is that, you know, in the research that I shared in my testimony, it shows that there are incredibly negative outcomes educationally for homeless children and for foster care students. But that does not have to be the case. And I think that is the point of this hearing today. What we see in the data is that it's the instability that causes these negative outcomes. So, for example, transferring schools mid-year. Every time a student transfers school mid-year, it's estimated that they are set back academically by up to 6 months. Currently, both in foster care and under McKinney-Vento law, children have a right to school stability, and that is really critically important. Yet in the homelessness data, we see 20%, 1 in 5 students transferring schools mid-year. So that means that the system is, as you say, not working. But if we can identify kids, and if we can provide them that point of support and connection, somebody to help them along their way, those outcomes don't have to be negative. So there was a case, a story of a young woman in Michigan. She was homeless prior to entering foster care. She entered foster care when her mother passed away. She transferred schools 18 times. She attended 18 different schools prior to graduating. But the point is, she did graduate. And the reason she graduated was because she had a educational mentor who was working with her and helping her through those transitions. In the end, she did end up finishing high school through a virtual program. That doesn't mean that virtual programs are the answer to every situation, but it was the ability of that person working with her, that person who knew her transitions, who knew her continuously across those points in time, that was able to help her overcome these huge obstacles, recover credits that she was losing in high school every single time she transferred schools. So I guess the bottom line in terms of your question is that what we need to address is we need to find kids before they experience the instability. We need to make sure that if you identify a child when they're homeless, when they're in foster care, if the school is engaged there, and you can prevent that child from transferring, that is going to reduce their risk of being chronically absent from school. Chronic absenteeism is, as everyone here knows, one of the biggest predictors of grade level proficiency and graduation rates. So we have to be acting early. And that is what the funding here that Dr. Lane was talking about really allows us to do. We have been in a reactive situation for years and years where we're not close to even prior to the pandemic, we're not close to identifying all of the children who are homeless. And now we have an opportunity to do that.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, now I'd like to recognize Mr. Groffman. Sir, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you. We'll talk to Gretchen Davis again. First of all, thank you for all you've done. It sounds like you've touched, maybe I missed it, the number of children's lives you've touched since you've embarked on this path. Kind of really incredible. I'd like to ask you, we've heard, concerns about the changes in life that foster children have, bouncing from school to school or parent to parent. You did mention that it's important, particularly important for these folks to be in school. And I know in my district, you hear complaints that for whatever reason, some of the more rural school districts and the private schools manage to stay open, and some of the larger urban districts, for whatever reason, were not able to stay open. But I wondered if in general you could comment on the benefits of in-person schooling, but also what you think we can do to avoid the bouncing around that we just heard about, going from school to school, and in particular, how that affects people in a foster setting, and perhaps maybe even elaborate a little bit beyond what we talked about here, maybe the importance of somebody staying with you rather than their birth parent, that sort of thing.
Well, I think stability is huge, and schools providing stability and a place for kids to go, and parents relying on that stability is huge, foster parents and biological parents. And so when you have a school that's functioning as it should and is open, especially for the most vulnerable, that stability can be utilized. When there's a disconnect between schools not being open and the rest of the country trying to get back to normal, it makes it really hard for these families, because the families have to go back to work and foster parents have to go back to work, but yet the kids are still at home. And I've talked about, for some reason, we're not in school on Mondays. It's an asynchronous learning day. And the reason for that is to provide special support for students. But I'm not sure I'm seeing those special supports for students on those Mondays. I think, families rely on the stability that school brings. And our schools are amazing in the programs that are provided and the safety nets that are provided. We're just not utilizing them now. We know what helps kids. We know what reduces the the dropout rate. We know what closes the achievement gap. We know how to teach reading well, and it starts with an excellent, good quality teacher who is with their students in the classroom. And as far as foster parents and what, their job has been made harder by not being in person in a lot of ways. One of my jobs is to bridge the gap between families and issues that they have, and to help families work together well. And it's hard when I cannot look the mom or the father in the eye and be in person with them. It's hard to do that on a screen. And so I'm just, I'm ready for people to go back to doing what we know works, which is educating kids well and in person.
Okay, I'm sure you know a lot of other people in the same position as you. And like I said, in my district, for whatever reason, it seems to me the relatively rural schools were able to stay in session through all this. I think just about every private school was able to stay in session, but some of the larger school districts weren't. And I'm sure you as well have seen different school districts reach different results, and I guess that's the result of local control. But have you seen any reasons why it would be justified for some schools to kind of shut down or put children in the position in which they have to teach virtually, as opposed to other schools that are able to provide a stable in-person experience for the kids? Can you think of any reason that you've seen that justifies this idea of, and it's going to be a big deal for summer school coming up if some schools still don't do in-person summer school. I mean, my goodness, the pandemic's almost over here. But can you see any justifications for it? Could you just comment on that in general?
Thank you very much, Mr. Groffman. I
No.
that's a good question, but maybe Ms. Davis can submit her answer in writing. Your time is up.
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving me the 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Thank you, sir. Next up, I'd like to Ms. McBath. Lucy, you unmute your microphone and you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And I just really want to thank all of our witnesses that are here this morning. Thank you so much for testifying in what is very, very timely conversations that we're having. And Chairman Sablan, thank you so much for prepping for this hearing. And I think everyone here can agree that children are absolutely our future. And it's our responsibility as legislators, those of us that are here today, to ensure that every child gets the quality education that they need and that they deserve. And I think, we all know that COVID-19 has, this pandemic has just exacerbated the inequities that we already knew existed in America. So today I'm grateful that we're bringing attention to the children who have been experiencing homelessness or are currently in foster care, and the children who are who've already struggled to get, the support that they need to stay in school. So thank you for this today. I represent Georgia, and just within the past year, Georgia had around 14,000 children in foster care. It's a huge number. And according to the 2018 Atlanta Youth Count study, over 3,000 youth are currently experiencing homelessness in the Atlanta metropolitan area. And that grieves me greatly. This number has really remained virtually unchanged since the last study was conducted in 2015. And across the state of Georgia, that number is even higher at a total of nearly 40,000 children that are homeless. So as a mother, even though I physically don't have my child with me anymore, my heart really breaks for these children that are not only having to navigate, the unusual obstacles of, their school lessons, but also having access to food and to clothing, and specifically under the tragedy of the pandemic. Mrs. Linda Coates, one of my questions is for you. We know that many students have lost great instructional time during this pandemic year. And although school closures have been just devastating for all our children, and that's what we've heard over and over again, we know that younger children in particular who have always had a harder time learning virtually, they've been hit particularly hard by the effects of COVID-19. How does your program plan to address this issue in the coming months and beyond to support our young children, and particularly those children experiencing homelessness and children in foster care?
Yep, thank you for that question. So specifically, we will be using funds this summer to provide programming for students to ensure that they have the chance to catch up, and our youngest children who have participated, many who have participated in virtual programming. We're giving them the first opportunity with our homeless families and our foster families giving first priority to take those seats. Just going back a little bit to understand why in some instances the summer program may only be able to be offered to a smaller number of children, in great part with our community, is we don't have as many teachers who are ready to move back into that space. So while we've been providing virtual pre-K as well as hybrid pre-K and full face-to-face pre-K during the entire pandemic, we did have families who chose to stay home with their children, whether it was by choice or by chance, that had to stay home with their children. And specifically for families who are experiencing homelessness or children who are in foster care, we are providing the opportunity for those families to sign up for face-to-face programming during the summer in order to not only catch up on instructional time that's been lost, but also socialization that's been lost. We do know that our youngest children, they learn best by engaging with other children. So as much as having the teacher in place to provide the constructs for learning, we know that children learn from one another. So we are planning a very robust summer program for face-to-face learning for the number of children who we can serve. And right now, we're starting off with 500. We're going to try to get 500 children into face-to-face programming. And as we see families are interested, we will continue to add to that number. So I'm so thankful you asked that question because we're really excited about it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Macbeth. And I'd like to now call on Mr. Allen, please, ranking member of this subcommittee at the last Congress, a wonderful colleague.
Yes.
Allen, you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank all the witnesses. Ms. Davis, you have a incredible story and legacy that would be good for all of America to hear, based on what you've sacrificed to try to help children. My mom and dad were both educators, and so I've been involved in this process for a long time. I will comment, my colleagues call this politicizing the issue. I call it getting the truth out. The truth is, in the 12th District of Georgia, what I ask our school systems to do is the taxpayers pay for the schools to be open and for the students to be taught. And I said that if the taxpayers are going to foot the bill, we need to open the school, whether one student shows up or every student shows up. And then the others, we will do our best to do online learning or hybrids or whatever. And our district responded. We've, the largest school system in the district has been open since August of last year. The teachers have returned. Of course, Georgia has led the nation in the recovery as far as COVID. In fact, our economy in Georgia has returned to pre-COVID numbers. And of course, the biggest problem we've got is this America Rescue Plan has got everybody on enhanced unemployment. We can't get folks to come back to work. And that's the biggest problem we've got with our economy right now. But the bottom line is, in Arlington, I guess my question in Arlington, Virginia, are the teachers unions in Arlington running the school systems?
Not yet.
Not yet. Okay. Why are the teachers not going back to class then?
I think that the administration has not put systems in place for that to be possible.
Okay.
I think, yes, you have some teachers that are concerned, but overall you have most of the teachers that are concerned about the students and not their own health, and are following the science and are reading what the American Academy of Pediatrics says and the CDC says, and they say, let's go. But, it doesn't matter how much they say that if the administrators are dragging their feet. And I've seen an incredible lack of planning and creativity in how to get things done. And, just like when you're parenting children, if you say mask up, let's go, this is what we have to do, kids will do it. But if you say, oh, I'm so sorry, this is so terrible, we've got to figure this out, there's just so many problems, then it delays and causes frustration that's not necessary. So I think we have amazingly talented teachers and highly qualified teachers. It's just there are not systems in place for them to go back to school 5 days right now.
Yeah, and frankly, like I said, in the 12th district, our teachers, if we had teachers that were compromised, they did the online teaching, and those that had no pre-existing conditions or were not compromised were in the classroom. So, and we had the funds to put in the enhanced air conditioning and filter systems as well. In fact, checking with all of our school systems, all of our school systems are financially in great shape, and we have pretty much all new facilities in my district. But as far as the root of the problem, and I'm running out of time. I got about a minute, but we've thrown a lot of money at poverty. We've thrown a lot of money at homelessness, housing, affordable housing, and opportunity zones, you name it. And we can't seem to fix this problem. It seems to be getting worse. Obviously, there's the family has been devastated in this country. Single parent homes seem to be the rule rather than the exception anymore. If you get to the root of the problem, obviously we keep throwing money at this, but I think we got to fix the problem. And can you give me some idea of what you think the real root of the problem is in about 7 seconds?
Well, I think there needs to be an all hands on deck approach, and we have the systems in place. We just need to use them well. We have the staff, the teachers. We just need to use them well and let them do what they do best.
Okay. All right. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Allen. I now recognize Mr. Levin. Unmute your mic and you have 5 minutes, sir.
Thank you so much, Chairman Sablon, for recognizing me and for putting together this really important hearing today on education for homeless and foster youth. According to research conducted by Poverty Solutions at the University of Michigan, research with which our witness, Ms. Herb Downward, is involved, 1 out of every 12 Michigan 5th graders experiences homelessness at some point during elementary school. So troubling. And as with so many of the major crises we experience in the United States, students experience homelessness more frequently when they're part of underserved populations, including rural students, students of color, students with disabilities, English language learners, LGBTQ+ students, and pregnant, parenting, or caregiving students. So Ms. Herb Downward, would you elaborate on the intersections among students experiencing homelessness and these populations that I've mentioned?
Definitely, and thank you for this question. So it is absolutely true that there are intersections and that many of the groups that or all of the groups that you've mentioned experience particular disadvantages when it comes to homelessness. I already referenced that Black and Hispanic students are 1 in 7 are experiencing homelessness at some point before they graduate, as compared to 1 in 10 homeless students in Michigan. Nationally, we see LGBTQ students experiencing significantly higher rates of homelessness. In fact, it's 2.9 times the rate of their non-LGBTQ peers. I think when we look at these intersections, what we have to think about is what are the systems in place to actually serve these different populations? And are we actually making sure that the services are in place in a way that meets the needs? I think it's particularly true, you referenced that rural students face a disproportionate risk of homelessness too. And I think that's a really important point as well, because we tend to think homelessness is more of an urban issue. You know, historically, that has been the story that's been told. If you were to look at the map of Michigan, though, you would see that some of the highest rates are actually in some of the more rural counties of the state. A lot of that has to do with the definition of homelessness. Families love their children. I think we can, let's start with that. Families love their kids and they want to protect them. And that means that in places which do not have shelters, which are the majority of places in the United States, most places do not have shelters. Families don't have any other option than to double up with another family. They do not have access to the services that exist. And we limit access to services in many ways because of these different definitions. And so going back to, thinking about what opportunities exist now, again, we can bridge some of these gaps. For families who are living doubled up, we have the opportunity to make them eligible for other funding streams through HUD. Right now, housing services, housing support services. Another thing that I think is important to think about is the expansion of the child tax credit. I realize that this is outside of the Education Committee right now, but when we're talking about poverty, homelessness, foster care, these are issues. Housing instability is an issue of poverty, and very deep poverty and instability. Families are just living on the edge.
All right, well, listen, I really agree with you. It's a super important point. And I also want to point out that the Department of Education's guidance for the American Rescue Plan funds dedicated to serving homeless students encourages states to partner with community-based organizations that specialize in serving these historically underserved populations. So I really hope that we see a lot of great programs there. But in the little time I have left, I've been listening to all this talk about, schools being open and not. My own daughter has been, first they shut down her school, then she was in virtual, then she was in hybrid, then she was in virtual, then she was in, now she's fully back in school. But Dr. Lane, can you tell us what's going on in Virginia to reopen schools? Because I think people are working very hard on this.
Yeah, and actually you're out of time, Mr. Levin. Could the answer be sent in, be written and sent in? The answer to Mr. Levin's question.
Yes.
All right, thanks, Dr. Lane, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you, Mr. Levin. I now would like to recognize Mr. Keller for 5. Mr. Keller.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I appreciate the topic of today's hearing, but I'm noticing a pattern of topics during the recent activity that seems to ignore the heart of the issue at hand. No matter which group of students we're talking about, schools remaining closed for in-person instruction hurts every single kid. Now that so many Americans have had access to vaccines, it is essential that we do not waste another day before fully and safely reopening our schools. We're talking about families in poverty, and this subject is very near and dear to me. I grew up in a poor family and understand some of the challenges children and families in poverty face. Having been homeless at one point in time in my life, it's not fun. And it's hard. Between 1st and 7th grade, I moved about 4 times. So what we really need to look at these challenges that are facing our children and families in poverty, we need to talk about education and instilling a work ethic and hard work. Because of education and hard work, I was able to make sure that my kids were never homeless and never had to go to bed hungry. So we need to be providing every tool possible to create opportunities and help children and families. And the best way to do so is through education and good paying jobs. So Ms. Davis, thank you for being here today and for sharing with us the challenges of COVID-19 and what it's presented foster parents and families with. The idea of any child not having enough to eat or a roof over their head is unconscionable. Thank you for the great work you have done in your community to provide homes for students who need them. Can you say more about what challenges will remain for foster families in the aftermath of the pandemic?
Yes, thank you. I think we will be playing a lot of catch up. I think we will be trying to mitigate a lot of damage. Arlington has a wonderful human services department, and they are very hands-on with their foster parents. But even they have had kind of their hands tied because everything's been closed. I think when things reopen, I loved hearing what Ms. Linder Coates said about offering surveys and reevaluating what's working, what's not working, and making changes. And I think that will have to happen. I can tell you that foster families have always wanted to do the hard work. And now there's just going to be a lot more hard work to do just to get kids in a safe place. I think we have a mental health crisis that we're going to have to deal with in children. We haven't even talked about the dangers of screen time and kids being left with devices, you know, unattended, and the amount of time we have our children on screens as a result of this crisis, and the impact of that. You know, social media can destroy children. And we have to, as foster parents and as educators, have to mitigate that damage for sure. So I think we've got a lot of fixing to do. I believe that we have great systems already in place to do that. We just need to do the hard work of helping children.
Okay. What would be your advice to governments, school districts, local education authorities, school administrators, teachers, and others about how to ensure that schools remain open and ensure that we don't need to make up any additional lost time once schools are open fully and operational again? I think Mrs. Davis is still muted.
Yeah. You are muted, Ms. Davis.
I'm sorry, I can't see you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I apologize. Advice, what I think we can definitely look back and see what we have learned from this. I think we need to reopen much more quickly if this ever, Lord willing, does not happen again, but if it ever does. Looking at the critical nature of FaceTime, and again, not the app, but one-to-one personal communication with children, the critical nature of giving families accurate information, not fear-mongering, not being living in fear.
Thank you. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I gave you additional seconds. So Ms. Davis, Mr. Keller, thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
All right. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Manning. Ms. Manning, could you unmute? And you have 5 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding a hearing on this very important issue. Certainly, children in foster care and homeless children deal with terribly difficult issues during normal times. And it's devastating to hear how the pandemic has impacted these very vulnerable children. Ms. Erb Downward, Congress recently appropriated $800 million dedicated to the identification, enrollment, and school participation of children and youth experiencing homelessness, including wraparound services. And the Department of Education recently released 200 million of these funds so that states and local districts can meet the urgent needs of homeless children and youth. Can you talk to us about how local education agencies can use these funds to better serve homeless students in the immediate future and the rest of the funds in the coming months in the upcoming school year?
Yes, thank you for the question. So I think the first thing is identification. We cannot help children if we don't know who they are. What Ms. Linder Coates brought up about asking questions in a way that is sensitive to families is a critical thing for all schools and all districts to take away from this hearing today and to move forward with. Families are scared to identify as homeless, and therefore the outreach needs to be sensitive, and it's best done in collaboration with community partnerships, with agencies that know those families and know the children through other means. So I think that's step one, really looking at what can be done in schools to reach out to families and to identify families. Other things that can be looked for at the school level are, signs like chronic absenteeism, transferring schools, not showing up to remote learning. All of these can be indicators that there's instability going on in the home. And so that can be a reason to reach out, to find out how we can help families. Connecting families to summer programs is a very important element. And then transportation is a huge need. Families are moving frequently, like we've discussed. Children who are homeless have a right to maintain stable enrollment in their school of origin. When that does not happen, we see negative outcomes. If a smooth transition can be made, that is much better. But if we can keep that child in the school of origin and provide transportation supports, that is huge. The last thing I'll say, and then I will turn it back over, is making sure families are connected to other programs. For example, homeless families are at risk of not having ever had to file their taxes. If they don't file their taxes, they're not going to be receiving the child tax credit. This child tax credit is estimated to reduce child poverty by 40 or 45% nationally. We are talking about issues of poverty. If we could reduce child poverty in this country by 45%, we would not be having the same conversation about homelessness and foster care. So really connecting families to those other supports is critical. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Mrs. Linder-Coates, Head Start's two-generation approach is a uniquely strong model in the education system, and understanding that children's success is dependent on their parents, Head Start invests in parents as well as kids to ensure the entire family is supported. Can you tell us how Head Start's two-generation model supports these problems, and what role do family service workers play in your Head Start program?
Sure, thank you for that. So, speaking of the two-generational model, we initially had a requirement that families volunteer, right, in the program so that they could see the benefit of the program. And we have been encouraging families, of course, to obtain employment, become self-sufficient, specifically for families who are experiencing homelessness. One of our initial processes that we undertake with families when they come into our program, enroll in our program, is establishing a family partnership agreement. And that family partnership agreement between our family service workers and our parents is really to help families think through what supports they may need in order to be successful in terms of moving towards self-sufficiency. Sometimes that includes completing their high school diploma. Sometimes it includes going back to school and finishing a degree. Sometimes it's about obtaining new skills so that they can be more employable in a different marketplace. So for us, that is the cornerstone or the bedrock of our intake process, is really figuring out how parents believe we can help them.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And I yield back.
Thank you, Mrs. Now, I'd now like to recognize, she's been here the whole time, very patient, Ms. Miller. Ms. Miller, please unmute. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank the witnesses and my colleagues for entering into this essential civil discourse on this important topic. I also want to address Ms. Hayes' comment that the teachers' unions have been constantly berated by us. That is definitely not my intent, and I don't believe it is the intent of my colleagues, but I do want to say that you are the teachers, the schools are the only essential workers that are not back to work. And so in light of that fact, yes, we have been critical. And I would tell my children when they were growing up, if the shoe fits, you need to wear it. On March 5th, I joined 58 of my colleagues on a letter to the CDC Director, Dr. Walensky, to share concerns about the stringent school reopening guidelines that agency had issued that did not seem to follow the science. I was concerned that so many schools remained closed when we had so much evidence that shows schools could be safely reopened, and a lot of them did, including the school in my community. Well, it turns out the CDC and Biden administration officials have been consulting with teacher unions about school reopening guidance, the same teacher unions that lobbied to keep our schools closed all year. On May 10th, I joined a letter with Representative Bob Good, Ranking Member Virginia Fox, and several other colleagues from this committee asking for an investigation into whether the CDC school reopening guidance was politically influenced by teacher unions. This is a very serious concern, and I'm eager to receive a response. What has gone on this year with school closures has been shameful, and it has disproportionately harmed the most vulnerable children in our society, as we have heard from the witness. And I want to give Ms. Davis a chance to share with us a little bit more. I do also want to say that my sister is one of the noble people that have pursued a career in education. She's a special ed instructor with a specialty in reading. And she was so grieved about schools being open that she petitioned her urban school to allow her to return to school because she's a special ed instructor. She and several other special ed instructors were allowed to go back. They have had in school, in-person instruction all year. And, but anyway, so my question for Ms. Davis, can you share more with the committee why you believe the Arlington County resisted calls from parents to reopen schools and to try to find a way, especially to serve what I would call the extra vulnerable population?
Yes, I will try. Thank you. I am baffled really by why we have not opened. I hear stories from friends who are teachers about, for example, a high school student who is living with her father. She's a special needs student, and her father had to go back to work, and she has no transportation to school. And when Arlington began hybrid, they took away some of the days that they gave special education students who were the first ones to go back in January. So those special ed students went from 5 days to 2, 3, I'm not sure how many. And this student begged her teachers, emailed them, please let me come back to school. And the problem that the teachers were told was transportation. And I'm baffled when I hear things like, oh, it's a logistical nightmare. Oh, it's too hard. We can't figure out how to make it work. I just think there's a lot of excuses and a lack of creativity, and frankly, a lack of planning. Yes, Arlington is a complicated school district, but so are a lot of districts that are making it work. So I would say a lack of creativity and a lack of planning.
Also, I do want to add, you brought it up. I've taught in public school, private school, and homeschool. And I agree that all-day virtual education is a very poor substitute. And I cannot imagine how the schools think, or I don't even know how they could claim that there's accountability that education is happening. What I've observed for, I have 7 children and a lot of grandchildren and a lot of experience with children and educating them. This is extremely unrealistic. Children need relationships. They're unique individuals and they need people to know who they are and to respond to them. They need variety during their school day and they need to be allowed to move. And I talked to educators and they have communicated with me that there really is no way to keep the adults that are supposed to be accountable and responsible for the education to actually make sure this is happening. And I just think it's such a shame. I think anybody that is advocating for schools to stay closed should feel ashamed. And those that think that we are berating unions should know that we are here to advocate for the students.
No, I'm sorry, the time is up now. Thank you very much, Mrs. Miller. And I now like to recognize Mr. Baumann. Sir, please unmute and you have 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you so much. My first question is for Dr. Lane. Dr. Lane, can you speak to how necessary trauma-informed schools are at this moment as to support not just our foster care population, but all of our students after we come out of this pandemic? Can you speak to the trauma-informed approach to education?
Yes, sir. Obviously, as our students began returning back to school at the beginning of the school year, and as some are just returning now, as parents were hesitant or school divisions have been opening, our students are facing a lot of trauma. Many have seen family members pass away in this pandemic. Many have seen significant illness in their homes. And it's important for our schools to understand the trauma that students are going through and have strategies in place to respond to that trauma, to be able to successfully make sure that student is prepared to learn. We all know, we talk about Maslow's research. Students have to feel like their safety and psychological needs are met before they can learn. And that's what trauma-informed care is about. And so we work diligently in the Commonwealth through our agency to partner with school divisions and provide resources and support to make sure that our students have the wraparound supports necessary to make them successful in our schools.
Thank you so much. My next question is for Dr. Linda Coates. Dr. Linda Coates, as a former educator, I've seen firsthand just how difficult it is to nurture the growth of a child, especially when considering the roadblocks to success many foster youth face. Speaking with stakeholders in my district, such as the Good Shepherd Services and other organizations that support foster youth and those experiencing homelessness, the issue of special education became a reoccurring theme of conversation. In particular, I worry about the foster children with special education needs. In the absence of a parent solely concerned about the well-being of their child, I worry that many foster children may fall through the cracks and fail to receive the specialized education they are legally entitled to. How can we make sure that every foster child receives the individualized education plan they have a right to? What can the federal government do to best support foster parents as they advocate to give their children the education they deserve?
So good question. So the first thing is just making sure that the foster agencies are clear about what the IEPs for children who have special needs entails. And a lot of times the information that is in the IEPs that will support children and making sure that they make progress, whether it's during this pandemic or any other time, making sure that all of the stakeholders are clear about what the goals are. That for us is one of our major challenges. And so the first response that we have is making sure that our special needs coordinators who we have on staff are sitting with teachers and family members. And in the case of families who are children who are in foster care and or who are experiencing homelessness, making sure that everyone is clear about what those goals are. So for what I would recommend is to have funds that are earmarked specifically for the education of those large, in our community, we have a large umbrella organization that is responsible for coordinating the services. So making sure that there is enough funding to ensure that the children have and the families have access to those supports that are outside of the school. So if, for instance, children may need wraparound service. They may need a person to sit with them in the school in order for them to be successful during the day. Making sure that those supports are available, but also making sure that the stakeholders who are involved in ensuring that those supports are available are educated enough to know what they need to look for. So a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. And I think if there are funds that are specific to that cause, making sure that there is enough services available, and also making sure that folks are educated about the services that are available so that each individual teacher, parent, and child and service coordinator can sit down and make sure that the progress is being addressed. That's what I would recommend.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bowman. I'd now like to recognize Ms. Steele. Please unmute and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Sablon and Ranking Member Owens. Ms. Davis, I want to say thank you to all the witnesses coming out. Ms. Davis, thank you for sharing your testimony with the committee. Your family story is heartbreaking. Your sacrifice and dedication to the foster system is extraordinary. It is sad and unacceptable that school districts across this country turn their backs on our most vulnerable children. You brought up a major concern in your testimony. Many students and family members did not and still do not have access to community support. Many of these families are already facing significant obstacles. Why is having access to in-person learning worth the risk that exists?
That's a great question. As I have said before, FaceTime is important. Interpersonal communication is critical. Knowing your students well, and I have to say that the teachers that I come in contact with really are trying hard, but you just cannot use what was supposed to be a stopgap measure, which is an iPad and some Wi-Fi, as the normal way to now teach reading or to teach high-level math. It just doesn't work. And if students are able to come back to the classroom, then teachers can use all the tools in their toolbox and not be limited to just those on a screen. And one example, Ms. Steele, is when you are teaching reading, you are teaching phonemic awareness, which involves you to look at a child's mouth and to see that they are forming the sounds and the letter sounds correctly. And that's very hard to do on a screen. You also engage children in several hands-on activities when you're teaching reading that go over phonics instruction and phonemic awareness and fluency, and you cannot do that on a screen. And it works so much better when you're doing that in person and when you are in small groups and engaging in activities and learning centers. And teachers know that. And so it's, I'm sure, very frustrating. I know very frustrating for the teachers that I've talked to that they can't deliver their best instruction because administration and those who are not in the classroom are dictating, wait, see, let's wait till everything blows over, let's wait till next year. That is one of the most egregious to me, is let's wait till next year, because I have kids in my care and my own children and the others who need services today. They need to learn to read, write, and problem solve today. And to be told, oh, we're going to wait and we'll be our best in August, that's not okay. That's a lot of time, and vulnerable children do not have that time.
Yeah, not just vulnerable children, but all the students, because I saw the assessment test result came out, and what a difference between those schools been open since last September and those schools been closed since last year. I mean, we already damaged enough children here, and I think it's time to open up. And we're going to make sure that kids are really looking at that, they are going into the classroom and they're going to learn. And they're not just learning knowledge, but they're learning social skills and others that, more important than ever. And you know what, I really want to do that. So do you feel many families lacked the opportunity to tell their story and express their frustration about their children being left behind? Because since you are testifying today, but a lot of people don't have a chance to testify that exactly what's going on with their children. You are muted.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
So do you feel many families lack the opportunity to tell their story and express their frustrations about their children being left behind, since you are one of the witnesses and you can express yourself with your, about your children, but a lot of parents that totally agree with you, but they cannot express to anybody because it's kind of like you are knocking the wall that nobody's really listening at this point.
Yes, ma'am. I think a
Yes.
lot of families are unable to, they've tried. You can submit emails and make comments to school boards, but there is not, let's say, active listening going on in a lot of those areas. And it is unfortunate. I mean, parents are in crisis.
I hate
Kids are really in crisis.
I hate to interrupt, but time is up. Miss.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Davis. Thanks, Chairman. I yield my balance time.
I now like to recognize the most junior member of the subcommittee, but actually the chairman of the full committee. That's Chairman Scott. Please unmute. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Lane, we've had a lot of back and forth on the opening of schools. There is no debate about the value of opening schools, and everybody knows it. The CDC has published guidelines on what it takes to safely open the schools. Ventilation, transportation, fewer students on buses, spread out the students might require smaller class sizes, PPE and disinfectant and staff to disinfect because the schools aren't going to disinfect themselves, maybe school nurses. We know what it takes, but all of that costs money. And now that you have the money under the rescue plan, is there any question that the schools will be opening in September?
Chairman Scott, thank you for the question. No, there will be no questions there in Virginia. We passed legislation this year in a largely bipartisan manner, and it was signed by the governor that will mandate a 5-day-a-week opening for all schools in the Commonwealth in the fall. In addition to that, we've stayed in alignment with CDC guidance. We have put out joint VDH and VDOE guidance throughout the year. CDC released new guidance on Thursday. We had our guidance out in the state on Friday. But as this pandemic evolved, the governor came out in Virginia in February and stated clearly that he wanted to see all school divisions open by March 15th.
Well, the question, though, is not whether or not you want the schools open, but whether you're going to do it safely. Some of us want the schools opened when it can be done safely, and we've provided you the funds, and I thank you for using the funds to make sure that the schools will be opening. You mentioned that the homeless funding, you have upscaled. Are you able to provide sufficient funding to appropriately serve all the homeless students in Virginia?
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, the funding that was available before the American Rescue Plan, no, we certainly needed more funding. We were not able to meet all requests when it was a competitive grant application. And so the funding in the American Rescue Plan goes a long way towards ensuring that we can meet all the needs in the Commonwealth.
Thank you. And Ms. Downwood, one of the problems that occurs when you have this kind of disruption is that people fall through the cracks. Are we finding that all of the homeless students are actually signing up for the education, or are some of them just disappearing?
So the latest research that we have on that is from a homelessness liaison surveys that was done in the fall. And in those surveys, we found that there was a 28% decrease in the number of homeless students who are being identified by their schools. That equates to about 420,000 students. So, there are a lot of students who are slipping through the cracks. We have the opportunity and the obligation now to identify them and make sure that we're supporting them.
Thank you. Dr. Lane, the American Rescue Plan distributed money for K through 12 education, essentially using the Title I formula, meaning it was disproportionately aimed at low-income areas, and at least 20% must be used for learning loss. We should expect significant progress in eliminating achievement gaps what is your off, and you've got money for smaller class sizes, summer school and that kind of thing. What is your office going to do to make sure that this money is used to significantly reduce or eliminate achievement gaps?
In Virginia, we formed a work group of education stakeholders that we call Virginia Learns. You can see the information that came out of that on our website. But Virginia Learns released guidance about how to think about recovering from the pandemic. It provided everything from what are the most impactful and powerful standards that are necessary for making sure that students know them to be successful, to how to spend money, to how to think about mental health. But of course, we provided significant guidance to our school divisions on the requirements under the American Rescue Plan, and of course, CARES 2 and before. In Virginia, this investment will absolutely be huge for us. The state set aside alone is nearly $210 million, of which about $105 million has to be used directly for learning loss. That is going to be a game changer. And just last week, we announced $62.7 million in CARES 2 grants to make sure that our students are being addressed with learning loss in summer this year.
Well, we're going to count on you to follow through on that, and if you could keep us posted on how you're doing, we'd appreciate it.
Thank you.
Sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. I now would like to ask some questions, but before I do, I would just like to, I think we tend to forget, I mean, nobody wanted this virus to come into our lives and, interrupt life. But we tend to forget the exceptional, outstanding ingenuity, the genius of scientists that were able to sequence the genome of this virus in such a short time. It took them less time to sequence the genome than they did in actually performing clinical tests. And that's some of the things we tend to forget, and we also only look at the interruption in our lives. But let me go, Ms. Earp, downward. A school can be more than just a place where students learn. For students experiencing homelessness and students in foster care, school can be a lifeline to meeting their basic needs, including food and clothing, in addition to education. So what are some of the challenges that homeless students and students in foster care face during the pandemic, and how does the President's call to reopen schools address those challenges?
So I think when we think about the challenges that homeless students face, if anyone has children, you can think about the challenges you see your children facing, and then you can magnify that by thousands. One, in terms of opening schools, the first thing the president's planned on is focus on opening schools safely. We have to open schools. That is critical. They need to be open safely. Parents, as has been mentioned, many parents are still scared to send their kids to school. So we have to figure out, how do we provide parents the supports they need to feel comfortable getting their children to school. I think the additional pieces there really are ensuring access to transportation, making sure that we are addressing food support needs, in the interim and at school. One thing that I have to go back to what Dr. Lane said, that, before the pandemic, there was not enough funding to meet the needs of homeless students. I'd like to give the example of Detroit, where I work. They have done incredible things to improve their identification system. But, initially they had identified, the Detroit public school system, which serves, 46,000 children, had identified 615 homeless students.
Yeah, so
just to give you perspective, 16% of students are estimated to be homeless there. So
okay, I do ask, so how does allowing schools to use funds for these purposes help students experiencing homelessness? Just as short an answer as you can.
I think it provides flexibility for people to actually focus on meeting the needs of homeless students. People have different needs.
All right, so in the short time I have left, Ms. Linda Coates, Congress has appropriated a total of $2 billion in supplemental funding for Head Start programs during the pandemic. So can you please tell us how your program has taken advantage of these funds, and how have those funds been used to support children experiencing homelessness or children in foster care?
Yep, thank you. So as I discussed earlier, one of the primary ways we used to was really to keep children connected, and also to provide PPE for those children who were face-to-face. We really did want to make sure that we had spaces available for for families of children who wanted to continue face-to-face. And we have partnerships with our child care agency. So although our district was closed for programming, our child care partners remain open with spaces that serve our families. And we also, again, I wanted to just reiterate, we also spent money to inform the teachers and help the teachers do the best that they can in the digital space for those families who chose to remain digital.
Yeah, and I have two of my youngest are actually teachers. One of them is a special ed teacher, and I did watch some of the frustrations they had, and also now both are very open to coming in and teaching summer school for their students that need to catch up, and you know, of course, that's their summer, but that they said their commitment is, and it's very important that their students catch up. So I want to thank you. Thank you very much. My time is just about up, but I'd like to, you know, I want to remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, materials for submission for the hearing record must be submitted to the committee clerk within 14 days following the last day of the hearing. So by close of business on June 2nd, 2021, preferably in Microsoft Word format. The materials submitted must address the subject matter of the hearing. Only a member of the subcommittee or an invited witness may submit materials for inclusion in the hearing record. Documents are limited to 50 pages each. Documents longer than 50 pages will be incorporated into the record via an internet link that you must provide to the committee clerk within the requested time frame. But please recognize that in the future, that link may no longer work. Now, pursuant to House rules and regulations, items for the record should be submitted to the clerk electronically by emailing submissions to edandlabor.hearings@mail.house.gov. Again, edandlabor.hearings@mail.house.gov. Again, I want to thank the witnesses for their participation today. Members of the subcommittee may have some additional questions for you, and we ask the witnesses to please respond to those questions in writing. The hearing record will be held open for 14 days in order to receive those responses. I remind my colleagues that pursuant to committee practice, witness questions for the hearing record must be submitted to the majority committee staff or committee clerk within 7 days. The questions submitted must address the subject matter of the hearing. And Mr. Allen? Oh, Mr. Owens. Okay, I now like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Owens, for his closing remarks. Please.
Thank you once again, Mr. Chairman, for this hearing. And I want to also thank all the witnesses for offering their expertise today. It truly has been invaluable. I want to focus my closing on something that was said earlier in the hearing. One of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle said she was tired of the criticism of those who refused to follow the science and reopen the schools. She suggested it was unfair. Mr. Chairman, do you know what's unfair? The mother we've heard about today who's trying to create stability for her and her 2 children who can't get a job because her 2 children are in school for just a few hours, 2 days a week on different days. You know what's unfair is, or who know what's tired, who's tired, is Miss Davis, who has served her community for 8 years as a foster parent and has seen firsthand the horrifying and potential permanent damage being done by keeping children out of school, who also is a teacher herself for 15 years and understands the challenges teachers face, and who none so have spent the last 2 hours telling us that schools must be open. I can add to that list Mr. Bush, who testified in our last hearing about whose son ended up in a hospital because he was separated from school. And also added to that list is Miss Dale, who testified before this subcommittee in late March about the harm being done to her daughter and kids like her daughter from disrupted education. These stories represent millions of other families all around our country pulling their hair out, worrying about what's happening to other children. It baffles me that the response from our friends on the other side of the aisle seems to be that we're being too mean or unfair to teachers' unions. Mr. Chairman, it's our job to point out when the education system is failing our children, especially our most vulnerable children. Of course, the response from the other side of the aisle is always more money. We've heard that today. They seem to think that we can just write a big check and that everything would be taken care of. But the Congressional Budget Office said almost none of this money will play any role in reopening schools. We know that Arlington County Public Schools have financial resources to offer teachers financial incentives to teach summer school, but still can't get more than 1/3 of the children back in person. Mr. Chairman, Republicans tried to tie tens of billions of dollars in COVID aid to requirements to reopen schools. The Democrats voted no 5 times, and that's 5 times no. Mr. Chairman, thank you again for this hearing. Thank you for giving a mother a platform to speak on behalf of millions of other families who see firsthand the harm still being done to our children. But now, Mr. Chairman, let's actually listen to what those families are saying. Let's respect them enough to not dismiss their experiences. Let's worry more about them than the delicate sensibilities of our union leaders. I yield back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Owens. I'm going to take the high road here and just thank you again. Thank our witnesses for being with us today. We now have a greater understanding of just how many children are homeless in America, how widespread the problem is. And it happens with or without the COVID, with or without the virus. And so I think the expert testimonies gave this subcommittee a sober assessment of the harmful consequences of this homelessness and of foster care, not only for the educational development of young people, but also for the long-term well-being of our country. The research is clear. Students and children who do not have a stable housing situation, who are removed from their families, must struggle to get the education they need to live independent and fulfilling lives. And that the money that Congress has made available will help these students, these families, with their needs to live independent and fulfilling lives, to grow into good members of our society. Particularly our Black and brown children, children with disabilities, and other historically underserved groups are affected because homelessness and reliance on foster care are manifestations of a larger web of systemic inequities. Congress has made significant investments over the last year to make sure all of America's children can continue their education. And as we confirmed today, these investments have particularly made a difference in the education and lives of children who are homeless or in foster care. Particularly, this money we have made available will give us greater hope and hopefully, almost certainly, make sure that we have schools will open in September. I have to believe, no matter our political affiliations, we can all agree these investments in America's children are worth taking. And I look forward to working with all my colleagues to build on today's discussions and ensure all our children have what they need to reach their full potential. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned. Thank you for all our witnesses again, and thank you for our members for today's insightful hearing. This hearing is adjourned.